What is the significance of looking at relative deprivation in relation to extremism?
So the theory of relative deprivation has been around in sociology, political science, studies of political radicalism for a long time, and it had been kind of out of fashion for a long time because it could be shown very conclusively in a variety of statistical studies. But the basic intuition, I think, still rings true to a lot of people, and that is that people who get their expectations up and who then have their expectations dashed by reality experience a particularly acute frustration, and that's a fairly solid social psychology finding. And as a next step, this frustration is then potentially turned into political extremism among a subset of those individuals. And in our own research, we find that the emergence of radical, violent Islam maps across different Islamic countries almost perfectly in line with what we think are patterns of relative deprivation. So larger scale violent Islamist movements tend to emerge at times when there's a labor market crisis, when there's a disproportionate production of graduates who don't find any jobs or no jobs that are commensurate with what they think they deserve. And at that times it's also graduates who constitute a disproportionate share of radicals in those groups. And that all indicates that it is probably socioeconomic frustration of those disappointed graduates that drives some of them into radical movements. And they're also absent at times when the labor markets are better or in countries where labor markets are better.
How has the connection between engineering and radicalism emerged across nations and between types of education?
There used to be for a long time just an anecdote that scientists and engineers are disproportionately represented among Islamist radicals. And what we showed in our own research, where we constructed a number of very large multinational samples of radical groups, is that indeed engineers are overrepresented very systematically in radical Islamist groups across the whole Islamic world, as well as the Western world among Western-born and bred Islamist radicals. And that is actually a slight variant on the original anecdote, which said that scientists and engineers are overrepresented. It actually turns out only the engineers are overrepresented, but they're very strongly overrepresented, which is the puzzle which our book tries to address.
What right-wing radicalism traits are shared among individuals who tend to select engineering, and what is the influence of gender?
So we argue in our book that there's a much stronger affinity between radical right-wing ideology and radical Islamist ideology than between either of those and left-wing ideology. So we argue that the vision of society in terms of restoring hierarchy, policing the boundaries of society, defending the in-group, fighting against the out-group, restoring a lost order, that all of those elements are shared between radical Islamism, not all types of Islamism, but the radical violent Islamism that we look at, and radical right-wing ideology. And then, based on political psychology literature, we do find that there's a number of personality traits that have a strong affinity to right-wing attitudes, and that's an established finding across a wide range of studies, both survey-based and experimental. And we identify the main traits from that literature, which A is being easily prone to be disgusted, B, a strong propensity to favor the in-group over the out-group and reject out-group, whether it's a religious in-group or an ethnic or national in-group, and C, a high need for closure, so a need for certainty, for a clear predictability and intolerance of ambiguity. Those three traits have been shown in political psychology literature to be linked to right-wing attitudes, and we then show that those traits are in fact disproportionately pronounced among engineers in the general population across more than 20 European countries. So from that we then infer that the political attitudes of engineers, who tend to be more on the right, are to some extent at least explained by those personality traits, and we also argue that those personality traits are what drive Islamist radicals with an engineering background disproportionately into radical Islamist groups.